Welcome to Politely Pushy. I'm your host, as always, Eric Chemi. Eric Chemi. Politely Pushy. I'm Eric Chemi, and this is Politely Pushy. Welcome to Politely Pushy. I'm your host, as always, Eric Chemi. Today, my guest is Rich Karpinski. He's the head of all IoT analyst work at 451 Research, which is a division of S&P Global. A lot of work you're doing, Rich. You know, the company obviously was acquired by S&P many years ago. So when people look you up on LinkedIn, they see a lot of different titles. So you're a very busy guy. Tell me, like, what are you doing today? I know today we're recording on a Friday in the home office there. What's on your agenda today?
Yeah, it's an interesting day, and thanks for having me, Eric. Doing some inquiry work, some responses to some vendor requests around edge compute on the one hand, around some IoT standards on the other. Also, we've been doing some internal work, a lot of work around GenAI, internal tools and such. So I've been leading some of that effort. And you mentioned 451. We're a relatively small group. We're part of a large organization now, S&P Global. So we have access to developers and resources that small analyst firms, or when we used to be a small analyst firm, we didn't have. So we've got some developers who are working with us to build some tools for our analysts to do their work, some GenAI tools. And so I've been real involved in that. So been working with the developer team today, sort of building some user stories around how we use GenAI, how we build reports, and those sorts of things. So that's like an interesting sort of sidelight kind of work from the day-to-day analyst stuff that we're usually working on.
A lot of people who are outside the analyst game, it's a real black box to them, right? It's How do I get coverage? Is it pay to play? What do I need to do? I can't get their attention, or I can talk to them and they steal what my knowledge is for their reports, but then I don't get anything, good written about myself, right? There's a lot of outside confusion, especially smaller companies. Like you're doing a lot with IoT, a lot of startups in that space, and they just have no idea, how do I get some traction here?
Yeah. I mean, I think the way to look at it as a vendor, right? So there's different sorts of analyst firms, and there's different sorts of relationships. I mean, I think what we tend to do here at 451 is try to have really close relationships with clients, right? So paying clients, quite frankly. So we're sort of not an influencer shop. We're not a pay for play shop. We're not, even with all respect to Gartner, you got to be on the Magic Quadrant. That's the thing, right, that AR folks have to think about. We're very close to our clients and our prospects in terms of getting to know them, helping them out with what they're doing, being an extension of their firm, whether it's strategy, whether it's go to market, whether it's sales enablement, et cetera. And as firms try to be lean these days, hopefully they look at us as a partner, right? Rather than somebody that's just trying to take some, as you sort of described it, take something that they have, their sort of crown jewels, and use it for our own good, right? So we're definitely trying to understand the market, understand innovation, understand where things are headed. Then we're trying to help our customers do that as well. And again, they need that in a variety of ways, whether it's whether it's informing their strategy or trying to tell their story out to the market. We hope we can be a partner for that. And I think that's the way, a small firm should think about it. And I think large firms obviously have a multitude of ways of working with us and are pretty sophisticated in terms of how they view the analyst and the analyst role within their world, right?
Go into that a little more. So when they're sophisticated for how they view the analyst role in the world, well, what do you like? Just dig more on that.
Sure. I mean, I think they a larger vendor is going to have an experienced AR staff, right? An AR team. Many of them will have come from the analyst world, so they know the game inside and out. And they're going to be they'll have various ways of working with us. Sometimes they're more tied to a competitive intelligence group, right? So they're being a front end, and that competitive intelligence groups is looking for data and information, and so they're front ending into our analyst insights, right? Other times they're fronting business units, whether they're sales or marketing or product or whatever, and those groups need some help from the outside, right? Again, whether it's an input into their world, whether they want some survey data or some market forecast data, et cetera, or whether they need some help in telling a story out to the market and out to their customers, right? And the thing that we always tell our clients is, in the way we position ourselves with our clients is, and this is even more so since we became part of S&P, which is very, we have parts of our business that are regulated, the ratings business, where we're very strict around being independent, right? So we're trying to tell an independent, unbiased story out to the market. And there's definitely a place for large firms to want to ride along with that kind of story, right? The authority, the independence that we can bring in telling a story. Because, clearly if you're a vendor and you're telling a story to a customer, you're trying to sell them something. Everybody knows what the interaction is, right? So if you can have some independent view to back up the way that your product or your service or your strategy is moving in the market, that's always very helpful. So, when we're dealing with larger vendors, it's very much a peer-to-peer relationship, and they're spending money on us, and we're counting on helping them. And all the cards are pretty much on the table. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard in both directions, right? But I think it's just part of how the tech world does business, right? You mentioned smaller vendors. It's challenging, I think, these days, especially a lot of startups in a world of AI, as I mentioned earlier. How to make use of an analyst firm. It's not as clear cut maybe as it was once, right?
A lot of companies I talk to that are smaller, especially, they're just like, what am I supposed to even do with an analyst? You'll ask them like, yeah, what's your AR
Fair
program?
question.
Like, huh? What?
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, it's a fair question, and I think there's a degree of size and maturity to when you even need to worry about it, right? If you're funded, right, you may be more interested in talking to, and you may need an investor relations type person, right? You may need to be doing some sort of PR to get some sort of message out to the market itself, right? I mean, there's different levels of maturity, and an analyst firm, I think, comes in. When you reach a certain level of maturity, you're trying to talk to customers. Your customers are more sophisticated. They've got more money to spend. They're looking for third-party validation or a third-party story to go alongside the vendor story. And so with smaller vendors, yeah, I think it's questionable. There was a time back when 451's early days, and so we still try to figure this out, where the smaller firm would come in, buy our service, really just to have a relationship with an analyst, and maybe to be even written about, right, by an analyst firm. I think that's sort of an old style of relationship. Today I think it's much more about again, unique insights, market data, forecasts, survey data, et cetera, things that they could generate themselves, but it's more efficient to work with an analyst firm. And again, you get that third party sort of independent view that they can bring into their story.
What about for you guys themselves, right? 451 was a small firm. Now it's part of a big firm. You've been there for that change. How has that changed, the business model a little bit, right? Because there's probably much more of a, hey, you're just a division. It's a P&L focused thing, maybe more. It's a corporate. You gotta make sure you're kicking in your margin upstairs, and it's not just whatever you guys feel like doing.
Yeah, we're very akin to a tech startup that's been acquired, right, by a larger firm.
Like, welcome to big corporate. Everyone's getting a new ID card, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's culture issues. There's political issues. As I mentioned with S&P, this is a regulated firm with a lot of the market data it has, and so we have to march to that step too. And I think it's good for us. The other thing is there's just massive opportunities being inside a firm like this. Right now, we're doing a lot of work in 451 around data centers and AI, utilities and power. The whole story around what's required of AI data centers, and where's the energy going to come from, and how are they going to expand, and et cetera. And so we can tell that from the technology side, but we've got data and we've got insights within 451 about the global supply chain of energy. Right, we have a massive event called Sarah Week, where is sort of called the Davos of the energy sector, right?
Dan
and so
Jurgen's big thing from Cambridge Energy Research Associates. Yeah,
exactly. And Dan Jurgen's going to be at our a data center event. We have a 200-person data center event in DC coming up, because these worlds are intersecting, technology and his world of energy. And so those kind of opportunities to be part of those big platforms bring our tech vendor partners who have known us for 20, 30 years into these environments as well is really, really exciting. So it's not without challenge to be a smaller group within a large company, but those are the kind of opportunities that open up for us and our clients.
I'm sure AI being discussed all the time. There's the AI of what the vendors are doing, but the AI, just how are you guys doing your business better
Yeah.
with AI? Because I know other analysts that are saying, hey, I can use AI now and it'll go through the data and make me a 30-page report. Boom. Like it's crazy. I don't even need a junior analyst for this kind of work.
Yep. Yeah. And no, and I've been at this a while. So a few decades ago, that was offshoring like analyst or journalism work,
Right.
so that was always kind of an iffy thing, but it was the same idea. And it's the same play here to some extent. I think if you're not really looking at it in the right way. I think the right way to look at it is the analyst still has, so I work with a lot of industrial firms, right, who help companies run manufacturing plants. And the key area there is as they bring in AI, they don't want to replace operators, the people who run plants, run assembly lines, they want to augment them. So this idea of human in the loop is talked about all the time. So there's all this expertise and capability within that human workforce. It's the same around analysts, right? You can augment it, but it's still extraordinarily necessary to have a human in the loop of this equation. And there's various reasons why. LLMs tend to hallucinate. They're only as smart as the data they're trained on. Which means they've got a training base, but also the data you share with it, right? And then, as well, they I sort of lost track what I was saying here, but to have that human in the loop, you have a point of view that you're generating from talking to all these companies, and that's still a human process. Maybe at some point an AI agent could go out and have all these conversations. It probably wouldn't be as fun for any of us if it was just machines talking to machines. But today, we still go out and we talk to people within these companies. We talk to enterprises, and we bring that back in and drive all of our analysis based on that broader discerning view of what's important and what's not. And that's still today a human function, right? And we're also dealing with humans on the other side, right? Our customers ultimately are humans. So it's good to have relationships. It's good to understand what their needs are, where they're coming from, et cetera. So in a lot of ways, it's no different than using Google to do search for information, right? It's a lot more efficient, but it's tricky as well. So it's a lot of art, a lot of opportunity, and a lot of sort of misinformation, both in terms of what you have to deal with, but also just how the whole sector views what this means for it, right?
What's the number one question that you're getting right now?
Within my practice?
Yeah. Like questions from questions that people want research on, questions from clients that like, hey, answer this for me. What is that?
Yeah. I mean, there's two big things. Everything's AI, right? And so everything's about what's the infrastructure necessary to support AI. How does AI impact the way our customers as vendors do their business? How does it impact our service models, service delivery and business models, right? Everything around AI. At the end of the day, we're an infrastructure analyst firm, right? So we're looking at digital infrastructure. So the biggest stories for us, or the biggest questions for us, are what are tomorrow's data centers going to look like? How are those workloads going to be distributed between the cloud and the edge and the very near edge on site? What within an industrial enterprise is that edge going to look like? All of those sorts of questions around the digital infrastructure in support of AI are really the big questions for us these days.
What did you think about that new announcement from Facebook, Meta, on the big data center?
Yeah, I mean, I think whether it's Meta or AWS or whatever, there's a big push and pull between supporting these large frontier models and these large companies that have these large data center strategies. And then again, there's models and there's inferencing and other AI capabilities that can be done in a smaller sort of way out towards the edge. And so it's the same push and pull we've been seeing forever. Client server, on-site versus cloud, massive data center versus distributed AI workloads. It's all sort of the same thing. There are some really interesting just geopolitical things to be looking at when you're talking about Meta and those sizes of data centers, where they're going to land, how they're going to be regulated, what they mean for the energy ecosystem, all of those things. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting time, and it's a lot of really what we are working with our clients on these days, trying to understand those dynamics.
How big are they going to get? This one's like, oh, this is going to be the size of Manhattan. How much bigger can something get?
It can get as big as you think. I mean, so we've seen. I don't spend as much time looking. I don't work in the data center area, but I mean, there are some smart cities of the future being built in the Middle East from scratch that have just basically data center infrastructure throughout it. And if you look at these things, you can see them from space, right? So they're going to be. But at the same time, it's interesting. They're coming out of China recently with the DeepSeek stuff. There was a look at smaller models, and so there's going to be this push and pull. Big data centers is consolidated tech, right? So large vendors are going to want to build in that direction. The Metas, the Microsoft, the AWSs, et cetera. But the internet, the web tends to go in the other direction towards more distributed. You've got things like open source, you've got mobile phones, et cetera. So there's always a push and pull between small and big. Big definitely seems to be winning these days, and the implications of that are kind of massive, right?
You mentioned smart cities. I feel like smart cities have been hyped for years, right? Like at least 10, 15 years in my mind. It's like, okay, we're really going to do something. It's coming soon, and we're working on this and that. And I feel like I don't see anything happening anymore.
Yeah, I mean, so we've been working with clients in the IoT area for a while, trying to help them understand what the key verticals are, right? And there was definitely a lot of hype, a lot of interest in smart cities, but it's pulled back. There are there's funding challenges. There's large procurement cycles. They're not the most adept technology enterprises often, right? And they've got a lot on their plate these days, other than smart tech. I mean, that said, there are some interesting deployments in places, and there's some interesting opportunities in areas. But again, sometimes it comes and goes. A couple of years ago, it was sustainability and ESG for cities, and now the political winds have shifted, and so they have more on their plate than just to worry about technology. So yeah, I think there are definitely other vertical areas where it's more tied to revenue. When it's tied to revenue, that's where the investment flows to. So things like industrial and transportation, et cetera, energy for sure. Those are the areas where IoT is really making a bigger impact these days.
Are you seeing IoT being a real growth driver for the mobile operators, the telecom guys?
Yeah, I mean, it's an always challenging business. I mean, that's my background in telecom, and they're selling network connectivity, which is typically a low ARPU business, and they've been trying to get into up the application stack forever. And IoT was one way they thought they could do it, but they always bump into what their expertise is really the connectivity business. And so, on the consumer side, I don't think IoT devices have generated massive amounts of revenue like smart devices or anything, add-on sort of tablet plans and smartphone plans and things. That's not a big revenue source. It's still core sort of 4G, 5G connectivity. And in the enterprise, there are certainly opportunities. It's going to fall towards larger telcos that look more like, global SIs than they do like network providers. And it's going to be a part of their business where they're working with select very large customers on projects where those IoT endpoints in an enterprise or an industrial environment are generating a lot of data, and they need to do things with it, whether it's edge compute or just moving it around. Is it a massive enabler or a generator of revenue for the telcos? No, it's still a challenging sector, but the sector itself, it's all the data, right? So it's not that it's not important, it's just that it's hard for telcos, as always, to sort of monetize that. Whereas if you're an AWS, you just set up a cash register and you start moving that data into storage and then compute, and it's just like ching, ching, ching. The telcos just don't necessarily have that cash register mentality or that engine, right?
Right. You know, I'm always curious about when people change their mind or they're surprised by something. You're constantly surveying the market. What's a stat or a trend, something surprising that you feel like you've learned recently that just stuck out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most amazing thing to me is, okay. So I'll step back just a little bit. When I worked at Yankee Group, and we were acquired by 451. So Yankee Group was very big into mobility and networks and such. When we were acquired by 451, they were very much a data center firm, cloud and data center. So one of the first events, 451 events I went to, we were sitting there, data center crowd, and they started talking about power and cooling, and I was like, what does this have to do with IT? Right? It was foreign to me to be that concerned about it, but that's what data centers are largely about. They're about the power to run them and to keep them running.
They're gonna stick them in the North Pole because it's cold, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Put them on a river so they've got energy, all of that stuff, right? So as we look at AI data centers, which we talked about earlier, just the massive impact that these data centers are having on the entire economy, the entire global economy, and the energy sector. I saw a stat recently that data centers could consume very shortly all of the current energy generated, right? So like they can just swallow up. Now, of course, we'd be generating more energy and power and et cetera to keep up with the pace, but like that's how consumptive these data centers and these capabilities are. So I think just the fact that AI and the data centers to support them are basically swallowing everything is the thing to be watching and to understand what that means for everything, right?
It makes me have a couple thoughts. If I'm competing against giant companies for electricity, what is that going to mean for my electric bill, right? Gas and
Yeah,
electric. It's like, oh
yeah,
well, there's a
yeah,
buyer of unlimited money and unlimited demand. So
yeah.
if you're the utility company, why waste sending money? Why waste sending power to Eric? He can't afford to pay the bills that we can charge the little guys.
Well, I guess, yeah, energy haves and have nots. Yeah, I mean, that's I think that's certainly part of the equation that I'm talking about. What happens to the energy sector? And how is the value distributed, and how is that change the global economy? It's just it's a massive question and sits at the center of everything. And again, it's not so much the data centers or the compute or the AI or the applications or chat GPT. It goes down fundamentally to how is power generated, how is it moved, where, all of that. And so it becomes, oil, gas, renewables, nuclear, it all sits at the center of the future in much the way it has for the past 50 years as well.
Do you see an ability for more energy supply to come online to meet all this
Um,
demand? Is there infinite supply available?
Yeah, I mean, so I know that I'm not an expert in this area by any means, but what I'll say is that there's two sides to that coin. So what we do in the IoT area, and it's definitely it's been of secondary interest to the market itself. But when we work with vendors who serve energy providers, there's a tremendous opportunity to make today's grid more efficient, right?
Right.
So to be more able to take signals from the energy grid and from the demand world and to match them more efficiently and take what being delivered on today's grid and make it 10, 20, 30, 40% more efficient, that's 40% more capacity you don't need to build out. So that's AI, and that's automation of the grid, that's automation of the manufacturing sector. All of that is driven by the data that comes off machines, that comes off the electrical grid, that comes, that you can put into to an oil refinery or a mining or operation to make all of this more efficient. So, in my world, that's a lot of what gets talked about. But clearly, the sort of the macro view is building more capacity to match the construction of new data centers. I mean, that's exactly what's happening.
When you talk to executives, what are they most worried about right now?
Yeah. Um, so if we're talking about the customers of technology vendors, there's a couple of different things. So we do a lot of work in the industrial sector, and
Yeah.
so in that sector, there's an aging out of the workforce. And so a lot of the expertise is going away. It's harder to hire in technically capable college grads into manufacturing when they all want to go into software and AI and quantum and all of that. So there's a real concern in those sort of bread and butter industrial sectors about workforce sunsetting and how you're going to replace that capabilities. Now here comes AI ready to say, we'll take it over, right? We'll capture all of that knowledge and we'll build agents and we'll replace them. But it's not really that simple. So in those worlds, it's a lot about skills and workforce, et cetera. In the world of more enterprise IT, right? It's really about managing infrastructure and what that infrastructure is going to look like and where it's going to sit, right? Is it going to be, do you need to have some massive edge presence to have high performance for robotics or something that's really low latency? Or can you push it all to the cloud as we've been doing? And as you do that, how do you modernize your applications and when and how do you modernize them? And then AI swoops in and you have to recalculate everything you were planning to do around supporting AI. So there's sort of those two different worlds. Some are just very practical, physical things like people retiring or dealing with power requirements in the smart grid. And in the other world, it's that sort of how is digital infrastructure going to evolve? Right, and what does that mean for how you build or lease or software as a service it, right? And so there's just different models as well. It's a complicated thing if you're a CIO these days to figure out exactly where you need to be ahead of the puck, 5-10 years down the line.
We talk about this at home a lot. My wife and I we think about if you're an executive, it's so hard to figure out, well, do we invest in what has made us money in the past? We know that it may be it's shrinking, it's a melting ice cube, melting glacier, but we know it works.
Yeah.
Do we then instead divert resources and money and time and management and all this into something new that we know is the future, but derails us right now, and we may not make money on that thing later. And it's hard because it's like the payoff might not be for 5 or 10 years. That executive might not even be there at that point.
Yeah, and you need to meet your numbers the next quarter.
Right.
Absolutely. So you can see it in certain businesses like retail, right? It's just a catastrophe if you're in brick and mortar retail the past decade, right? Now you might be out the other end, and the industry looks completely different than it did. But that's a great sort of warning tale of what happens when a sector just becomes completely altered, and you're having to deal with today's infrastructure and today's customer while looking out ahead. And you've got Amazon coming in and changing everything with the different business model right under your feet, right? And so that happens again and again and again these days. And I think if anything, you have to be somewhat discerning. This gets back to what we started talking about and why analysts are important. You have to discern fad from reality. You have to put a business front and focus on looking at technology. You can't deploy it for the sake of it, and you have to watch out for hype, right? And so that hasn't changed. It's just become much, much more complicated, I think.
What's the biggest hype right now that you're hearing or that you think is hype?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think in some ways there's a lot of this is underhyped in terms of technology, in the sense that things are going to change so fundamentally in ways that are not obvious. I think if anything's overhyped, it's consumer tech. I don't know what would be a good example. I think our home lives are not going to change as radically as a manufacturing plant's going to change, right? As fundamentally and as impactfully. I think sometimes we get new technology there. It's nice to have, but our sort of consumer life goes on the way it is. We just sort of shift to the left or shift to the right, and it's not completely different. So I say if anything's overhyped, it's worrying that it's going to change it's going to change you as an individual drastically. I think we can all sort of adapt to what's coming at us, whether it's ChatGPT or whether it's, we've been looking at sort of VR goggles and things like that forever. Eventually, they're going to play a role in some way, shape, or form, but it's not something. Those kinds of technologies don't come into our lives and completely change us overnight. I do think in the enterprise and industrial and those sorts of spaces, it's extraordinarily fundamental, impactful changes that aren't overhyped, right?
You've been covering tech for a long time. What is something that you've had to change your mind about over the years? Like maybe something that you thought would never happen, but it did, or vice versa.
It's pretty interesting. So I mean, we could talk about sort of just the publishing world, right? So the fact, so I grew up in B2B magazines, right? Publishing magazines that were super thick, and I worked with one of your colleagues at Telephony magazine, and we put out a weekly magazine, as a print magazine, and then the internet came, and all of that just sort of melted away. But in a lot of ways, it's back again because there's a fundamental need for information, for communication, for commerce, for marketing in the B2B realm. So, everything broke down and then everything sort of reassembled in some ways. It doesn't look the same way it used to. But I'm surprised by how many B2B publications there still are that are websites and data resources and newsletters, et cetera, that have a strong business. So, I mean, I think at one point we thought everything around publishing was going to disappear. The fact was it just sort of reassembled in a new form. And it's a necessary thing. It just looks different. So I think sometimes when you're looking at change, you have to look what is the fundamental thing about something that's going to be maintained even as everything around it changes, right? And so things don't tend to disappear. I think they tend to morph more than anything.
Right. Right. Tell me about that journey from journalism into the analyst world. Was that gradual? Was it sudden? Did you wake up and say, "Oh,
yeah,
publishing's going away. I got to get a different job"? Like, how did that happen?
No, I rode publishing out to the end, right? So, I rode like a $50 million plus print publication down to a sub $1 million newsletter and website, and then it basically went away. And when I made the leap into the consulting or analyst side, I had relationships and I made the jump. In a lot of ways, it's the opposite side of the same coin, right? We were sort of in the same business, just doing it in different ways. The biggest change was to, on the first day, I have to go tell these companies that I used to get information from what they should be thinking, right? So that's if you want to talk about it, imposter syndrome on day one, that's a big thing, right? Suddenly you're the expert telling them what they should be thinking. But I mean, I've been doing this for 12+ years now. I don't even know, probably more. And so it's really the same game. And I mentioned how sort of publications are morphing a bit. I think even journalists today have to feel and look and work a little bit more like analysts, right? They're not so much a reporter because all that information's out there. It's a different role. You're not a journalist or a reporter. You're kind of an analyst in some way, shape, or form, which I think is good. So when we go to trade shows and stuff, we see a lot of sort of publishing peers who are kind of in the same role. They just execute it in a different way. But it's a lot of fun to be able to have these two-way conversations with vendors, for instance, and to be able to help them as much as they help you, and be more of a peer. So I think that's the biggest difference.
Do you still feel like you have the imposter syndrome, or you're good now? Doesn't reason?
I'm pretty good at this point. Yeah, I'm trying to think what I would still feel an imposter about. No, not so much. Yeah. I think the one thing you do learn when you're sort of taking inquiries in from companies is that nobody sort of knows everything, right? And so when you can exchange knowledge or value, everybody's sort of bringing something to the table. There's no one out there that knows everything, so everybody's either a slight imposter or a slight expert, and usually someplace in the middle, right?
Nobody knows everything, but nobody knows nothing as well.
Yeah.
Everybody knows something.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's true. There's a lot of value to be gained. So we have it's been interesting. I'm an individual contributor, but I also manage our team, and we've got folks who have been in the business as long as I have, and we've got some new analysts that have come in. It's really interesting to see when an analyst can take off very quickly, how they can apply some sort of basic skills into an area that can be pretty challenging to get yourself up as an expert quickly. But yeah, it happens, and I think it's an interesting area now these days, and I think being able to work with analyst relations teams and communications teams as they're evolving in your business is also interesting as well. I imagine just how you guys have to work and talk to the folks that you talk to is changed tremendously as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Rich, this has been fascinating. Thank you.
Sure.
For chatting with me. I mean, I could talk to you all day, but it's like, okay, we're at 35 minutes now. That's good for our audience right there. I don't want to make it a whole hour, but they got to pay you for that. If it's an hour, they got to pay you. Yeah. So, Rich, I appreciate the time. This has been fantastic. Yeah. Really insightful to hear how you're thinking about things, what's changed, what we're, what a lot of normal people may not realize about what's going on in the business. Yeah. And look forward to talking to you more.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it again. Take care.
Thank you to my guest, and thanks for listening. Subscribe to get the latest episodes each week, and we'll see you next time.